All right, item 12, adoption of the City of Yuba City's fiscal year 2021-2022 operating and capital budgets and fiscal year 2021-22 appropriations limits. Presented by our Finance Director, Mr. Spencer Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. And this is a little bit of a truncated version of the presentation that I gave on May 25th, last Tuesday. So that presentation in full is on the city's website for you to view. I do want to just hit the highlights and recap here before asking for action from the council. I do want to mention first that, as the mayor just said, we do have ARPA or HR 1319 funds coming to the city in 2 installments from the federal government, and those will be treated separately. Then this budget addressed separately, and a future staff report will be coming to the council to make recommendations from staff. The city does have one-time monies through cash flow. We had a $2.6 million surplus last fiscal year in 1920, and we're anticipating $2.5 million of surplus in sources for 2021. And then we also, to utilize those one-time monies, we have programmed just under $1.9 million in capital improvement projects. Again, this is, perhaps I was remiss. We are talking about the general fund here, no other fund. And there will be some recommendations for pension stabilization out of these one-time monies, some other transfers and one-time items with total uses of about 3.1, again in one-time spending. As the mayor just mentioned, in the operating budget, we are looking at a small structural surplus, about just under $128,000, where we're adding revenues to last year's very minimal revenue budget because of the concerns about the ongoing pandemic. We aimed pretty low last year. This year we're adding just under $5.5 million. And in expenditures, we're adding about $3.5 million to the general fund budget. This graph just illustrates how council policy and direction shapes the budget. You can see that a little more, about 70% of the budget is safety and infrastructure here in Public Works. And then the other departments are either their own revenue generators in some way, like community services with the recreation programs, or support departments like human resources and finance, et cetera. The largest revenue changes, a good chunk of that is right up here in the sales tax. We were very doubtful this time last year at what sales tax was going to look for. I was very pessimistic. The news wasn't great going into the budget season, but we found very quickly into the early fiscal year that sales tax were strong, and they continue to be robust. We also have really strong property taxes right now. We're expecting about $1 million increase. The largest expenditure changes, again, restoring the 2.5% reductions from a request that council made of the departments last year. They requested that we reduce our operating budgets by 2.5%, and one department at least reached for 5% reductions. And so putting those back, it's about $1.2 million. And then the other changes you see are mostly surrounding personnel changes and payroll changes. There is some capital acquisition requests from the departments. This is where these are funds set aside for technology replacement. You'll see some surveillance video systems and some police handheld patrol car radios. No budget talk is complete without a CalPERS slide. So here's your CalPERS slide. You can see that CalPERS rates have increased pretty steadily. In 2016 actuarials, we thought they were going to be much worse than they are now. CalPERS has reduced their estimate for Yuba City, where it is flattening out, but I think that this is going to be just temporary while CalPERS contemplates reducing their assumption rate from 7% to something lower than that. These recommendations will be part of the resolution. We do recommend paying back the $500 or $500,000 we withdrew from the Pension Stabilization Trust, and this was again, as we were concerned in 1920 about being able to finish the budget year in the black, and so we withdrew $500,000 from the Pension Stabilization Trust to help offset general fund costs for pension. We also have a recommendation to make an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS to help pay down that unfunded liability. We will be bringing at a future date some recommendations for fleet leasing for our light vehicle fleet, pickups and sedans essentially, and some lease financing recommendations for heavy vehicles such as fire engines, dump trucks, and a backcon truck. Not to rehash the enterprise discussion that we just had, but I do want to just show some slides on revenue and expenses and debt coverage ratio. For the water slide, you can definitely see that while revenues in orange are increasing, they're a lot more flat than the purple bars that are expense. And one of the items that Ms. Langley pointed out was the debt coverage ratio for waters. This includes the assumptions for rate increases will be still declining, but end up about 2.06 and is required to be at 120 by bond covenants, 1.2 for the coverage ratio. This slide also shows an additional element, net revenues in orange and cash reserves in the light blue. So here you can see that the cash reserves are declining, as are the net revenues. A lot of the cash reserve decline is because we're programming those cash reserves for water improvements at the plants or in the ground. Very similar slide with wastewater revenues. Similar story. We do see revenues increases. We also see the expenditures increase at such a rate that the debt coverage ratio is just over 1.5, and it's required to be at 1.2. And Ms. Langley's slide showed this very well. And about every other time I look at this slide, the orange bars disappear. So pardon that. They were there last time I looked at it, so my apologies. But we can see how CIP has increased. The very tall bar, purple bar, is the wastewater treatment plant improvements of recent years. But as it starts to settle down, you can see that cash reserves are also starting to decline as well as we continue to program capital projects. The utility funds do have capital acquisition requests. In here is the back-on sewer jet truck and the 10-yard dump truck that I mentioned earlier that we'll be bringing back to council and contemplating lease financing. And some equipment for the lab here as well. Then I added in my presentation just a very brief summary of the capital improvement projects. As you read through the slide, I won't read it to you, but as you read through the slide, the capital improvement project funding requested by fund, the general fund, as I mentioned before, is just under 1.9 million. TDA, LTF money, which is transportation infrastructure money, is about a little over 1 million. Streets and roads funding, which comes from gas tax, is about a little over 1 million, and development impact fees coming from development is just over 3 million, and CDBG to help with some sidewalk repairs and ADA improvements is about 300,000. As we move over into the utilities funds, water's just over 3.3 million, Wastewater, just under $4.5 million. State revolving fund loans that Ms. Langley mentioned is $1 million this year in new program money. And other funding coming from grants, et cetera, is about $5.88 million in this budget. And that's new requests. With that, my recommendation is to adopt a resolution approving the proposed fiscal year 2021-22 operating budget, adopt a resolution approving the 21-22 capital improvement program, and adopt a resolution approving the city's appropriations limit for fiscal year 2021-22. May I address any questions?
Questions from the council? All right, anybody from the public would like to comment?
I'm curious if you couldn't take some of that money from like bike path or other, and then, you know, shave some of that money out and put it over on the water program, you know, because that water program seems to be one of your biggest issues. And then that ARPA money, I guess it's called, can any of that be shifted to the water program?
The bike path money, how much of that is grant funds?
I'd have to look it up.
Okay, don't worry about it. The ARP money is as I mentioned before, is we're trying to wrap our arms around exactly what that can be spent on and if there are any strings that are attached to that spending. We have received the first round of that. Mr. City Manager, any idea when we have some final info on what it can be spent for?
We are working on that now. We have the first tranche of money, which was $7.8 million. And the executive team will be working together to put potential projects together for the council and public's review and consideration.
I would say that when we were developing the budget, we were certainly mindful of this money coming in and its potential ability to help fund some of the water issues and wastewater issues. Yep.
So just to answer your question, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
about just under $2 million of the $2.2 million is grant funding.
So that would be earmarked specifically for that project and not able to be transferred.
The remainder is transportation funding.
Right. I would like to mention one thing that I failed to mention and the city manager did mention last time, and maybe you could highlight this. One of the big items that was able to be funded in this was the restoration of firefighters out of the SAFER grant. Could you speak on that, please?
We were able to fund restoration of 6 firefighters that were previously funded by the SAFER grant. That was a lot of work by staff to come up with the method to do that, and we believe that through robust revenues and ongoing robust revenues from the sales tax, that we'll be able to adequately fund that, and we're very pleased to do so.
So major emphasis from the vice mayor and myself up through the council was to make sure that, again, we were taking care of essential services, police, fire, roads, water, and sewer. We're not discounting any of the other quality of life things that were going on, but it was important for us as a council to put a priority on some of these essential services. So I just wanted to make sure we highlight that. I missed that during the budget workshop. And once again, I think that sometimes, you know, this seems like, hey, here's this budget thing, and they ran right through it, and they're gonna vote on it. This is hours and hours and days and months and of work. I'm not saying that for sympathy. I'm just telling you it's not something that, you know, somebody crunches some numbers over a weekend and throws at us. It's something that takes a lot of research, a lot of work by our department heads to determine what they need to manage their departments, and the staff in the finance department, Lynn Hale is in the audience, Mr. Morrison, are the tip of the spear to put that all together for all of us to consider this evening. Any other comments from the public? Nothing? Okay. online?
No public comment.
Okay. Back to the council.
Through the mayor, just a couple more comments, because I don't want to confuse people with my nay vote on the last one as it relates to the budget, because you've put it very well, what we've been through for 2 years going through this budget. It's not that I don't recognize the need is real. We have gone through this budget. The funds just aren't there. But at the core and principle, that's where I just had to stop. And, but the need is real, and this team of city employees and directors do a hell of a job with everything that they've given, and they've jumped through a whole lot of hoops. So kudos to you guys, Spencer, Diana, you and your entire team. You guys do it. I see the need. It is real. This budget, hours, days, months, for me, it's been 2 years. Glad to get back right where our priorities should be, and that's what this city does well. And it's the essential services, which is fire, police, water, sewer, roads. Everything else adds into the quality of life, but those are the basics. And we talked about that as a council when we were going through COVID, and it was like spend money on this or do that, and it's like pull it back into the core. What is our essential function as a city? What do we need to provide? So it's a good budget, and by all means, do not confuse my last nay and principle as to there's not a need. There is a hell of a need for a lot more money than this city even has. So thank you, guys.
Through the mayor, Spencer and Lynn, thank you so much. You have fully made efforts with our CM, Dave, to really inform us in all the aspects of the work, where the money and how everything's been. A lot of the funding has been modified in ways that it's much more digestible for any individual to really understand how city funds work and various and different revenues. I want to thank, I did this last time, but I want to acknowledge, because this is an actual council meeting, not a workshop, but I want to acknowledge Councilman Harris for, starting the lead on the budget ad hoc, along with Vice Mayor Shaw and Mayor Boomgarden. I believe that even though we've had such a challenging time in this last year with changes that were dramatically came into people's lives that were just unpredicted. And one thing that I believe as a council, along with the executive team, with Diana Langley in charge pretty much at that time, the best decisions that we made as a council were to really put some measures in there to be safeguards for funding. One thing was, hey, how can you reduce or stop any expenditures 2.5%? And that money saved us over $1 million that we can access and put back into the budget. In this last 2 years, as serving our community, I believe, and I don't know if anyone else has information, please correct me, because I do like being corrected if I'm saying something incorrectly. But I believe that this year is the first year that there's an actual surplus of funding that the city has experienced in, I don't know, at least 10 years or more. And I think that's an acknowledgement of the work of the executive team. That's the acknowledgement of the work of commitment and giving by the community that works for the city. And that's just the community in general, how we are. We all pitch in and we help out each other. So I want to thank everyone for that time frame that you were so generous in giving up, giving some of your funding. And one of the bigger issues was, how are we going to retain these safer, team members that we have for our fire department? How are we going to sustain this? How are we going to make sure that we do not reduce the level of service at each of these stations that are so necessary, and even more so necessary during COVID. I often saw our team out and serving people physically across the street, in front of my house sometimes, in other locations. There is so much that the community that works for the city, over 300-plus employees, and their commitment and their love to this city is admirable. And for us as a city to put our budget in a place where we have a surplus is incredible in this moment in time, but it's also a good problem to have that I would like to acknowledge. I'd rather have my own personal account to have a surplus of money in my own. I don't know who else likes having, less money in your account, right? Negative. I don't like my personal account to be that way. So I will be a good shepherd to make sure that the city's account has money in it and it's being spent according to what we all set as these priorities in our city. And we've been working on these priorities, and part of that is bringing these together, the funds to the priorities, and how does this all come together? And what else do we need to do as a city? Well, we need to raise those water rates because our infrastructure is in really dire strait with that. And to be negligent on that is a bad decision, I would say. So I fully support the work that you've done, Spencer. I've seen the last 2 years how you and Lynn have really made this possible for us to be able to digest this and to work through this, and I'm ever grateful for your work. So thank you so much for what you've done for us in our community.
You good?
I'm good.
Good. Okay. Action from the council.
Through the mayor,
Sir.
I'd like to make a motion that the council adopt a resolution approving the proposed fiscal year 2021, 2022 operating budget. Also adopt a resolution approving the fiscal year 2021, 2022 capital improvement program. Project summaries by funding sources are, okay. And then adopt a resolution approving the city's appropriations limit for fiscal year 2021 and 2022.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilperson Kirchner and a second by the Vice Mayor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, item 12 passes unanimously. Thank you, Spencer, Lynn, everybody else too, Rob, Jesse, Diana.